Sometimes I get distracted. Not just the normal distracted of turning to my phone when it buzzes or letting the internet take me down rabbit holes, although those happen too. Sometimes I get so distracted talking about what kind of Christian I am not that I forget to talk about what kind of Christian I am. In fact, that is true enough that I am squirmy already, as the word Christian is overly affiliated in my head with things I struggle with. One of you once said that Jesus follower worked better for you than Christian for that reason, and I love it. And also, Christian means little Christ, and as I do think that the whole point is to continue the work of Christ in the world, it's probably worth the discomfort involved in claiming it anyway, but you can make your own choice on language. A friend and colleague, the Reverend Andrew Nelson, recently dropped off a book for me, which I believe is a great way to share love. Particularly when this was a book I had been looking for and not finding for years. I didn't know exactly which book on Celtic Christianity I wanted, but I knew I needed to find one, and this one turns out to be it. Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul by John Philip Newell. And as I started to read it, my whole being relaxed. Here, encased in centuries of tradition, is the faith I know to the core of my being. When so much of my life in the church at large has been defined by being an outlier, a prophet, a person crying for justice for God's beloveds, it is awfully nice to hear that my faith has deep roots too. I think perhaps it is nice to hear that I belong too. That the faith that says, God created all and it is good, is valid and real and deeply faithful and not some radically new idea. So I want to share with you some of what I heard in Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, in hopes that it will also help drop down your shoulders and let you take in deep breaths, that we can celebrate who God is, the one who we know to be loving, along with our great tradition, that we can acknowledge that we are faithful people to a faithful God. And I really like this. So the first chapter in the book tells the story of Pelagius, a Welsh monk who lived around 360 to 430 of the Common Era. But it actually starts by sharing the beliefs of the first known Christian teacher in Celtic territory, the ones whose teaching would have formed what Pelagius knew. And that teacher was Irenaeus of Lyons. And his teachings were that sacredness was not opposed to naturalness, that there is holiness in naturalness, that heaven is found in things of earth, that the divine is to be cherished within the earthliness of human life and relationships, that Jesus was robustly human, that the universe is born out of the substance of God's own self. And in that case, that is a distinction from another teaching, that the universe is born out of God's own self and not out of nothing. Taken to its natural conclusions, these beliefs say the stuff of the body of earth is sacred stuff. Therefore, how the body of another is handled in relationship, how the physical needs of those who are hungry and homeless is responded to, how the body of the earth and its resources are treated. These are all holy matters. Yeah. And if bodies are holy, then they shouldn't be exploited, but rather honored and cared for. And I keep marking check in this book. So, as obvious as this was to me, it ended up being in opposition to the way that the majority of Christianity, under the leadership of the Pope in Rome, understood things. Because there's this doctrine called creation ex nihilo, which says that creation was out of nothing. And if that's true, then stuff doesn't matter, and people can exploit it all they want. And the implications of this in the world around us are abundant. But it is very nice to know that this has never been fully accepted in our tradition. The teacher, Irenaeus, taught that Jesus was the one who was re-speaking the sacred essences of the universe, resounding the divine that is in the heart of all things. This was to see Christ as reawakening in humanity what it has forgotten. So not Jesus saving the world, nor Jesus standing against the world, but Jesus reminding the world of its sacredness and the things it already knows. And when I read that, I thought, oh, I've been trying to figure out how to say that for my whole life. Now, into the wisdom tradition that Irenaeus formed came the monk Pelagius, who taught that grace was given to reconnect us with our nature, which was sacred and made of God, which I believe, and I like knowing that it's been known for a really long time. And Pelagius ended up in Rome, which seems to have become a problem for his life, because rather than being with people who knew the sacredness of all that is, he was with people who knew the church as a power player in politics. And they took issue with him because he thought women were wise and worth learning from and teaching. And he emphasized human sacredness instead of human sinfulness. And he believed that what is deepest in us is of God and not opposed to God. And I just love it when people put into words the very things that my whole being knows to be true and I hadn't even known needed to be said. Now, Augustine, who I have read in both college and seminary, was all out of sorts about this. So he spent a lot of time discrediting Pelagius because he wanted to focus on original sin. The original sin doctrine was useful for the empire, and it has been useful for the church. But I would not say it has been useful for God's people. So Augustine got Pelagius banned from the empire, him and his teachings, and because apparently it is really upsetting to an empire if everyone is sacred and everyone matters. Because then they're not there to be controlled or used, but rather to be revered and related to. And I will say, I already knew that one because Jesus taught me that. But worse than the other stuff, Pelagius also taught that people who had more than enough should share with those who don't have enough, which once again I find to be fairly easy as a way of following Jesus, but that belief got him excommunicated. So, Pelagius went home to Wales, and he kept teaching, and he wrote under pseudonyms so that people could read it, right, because his teaching was banned. And I rather love this. He often chose to write under the pseudonym Augustine so that people could read it. And the teaching that he continued to offer also included this: that it is not so much what you believe about Jesus that matters. The important thing is becoming like Jesus, becoming compassionate. A Christ one, he said, is one who shows compassion to all, who feels another's pain as if it were their own, and who is moved to tears by the tears of another. And that sure sounds like what we believe, doesn't it? So, funny enough, the teachings of Pelagius were not stopped by being banned by the Roman Empire or excommunicated by the Western Church, or even when he got sent back home. And I knew this because I was taught these things as a child. And I have experienced them as an adult. I just didn't know their history until last week. When we get invited by Jesus to go and make of all disciples, I don't think that we are told to go into the world and tell people they are wrong if they don't follow Jesus. I know you're shocked. Instead, I think we're invited to be in relationship with people and to learn from their wisdom and to share our wisdom, including the stuff that Jesus is re-speaking and resounding, the wisdom we know in our souls and simply need to be reminded of. The stuff like all creation is sacred and all people are to be honored and the way of God is not the way of control over. When I think about what beliefs I center my life on, I usually use the word inclusion. But it has occurred to me that I get to inclusion by believing that all people are sacred and beloved by God, and therefore all people are welcomed in the church. And I get all sorts of upset about exclusion because it implies that there is a limit to the sacredness of God. And that's wrong. And I think it's silly. Hosea says God is like the one who picks up an infant and smushes them to their cheek. God is like that with all of us, all the time. Thanks be to God. Amen.